Well, right now we want to take our Bibles and turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 again. Well, I can say with certainty that I have probably been to more funerals than anyone else here in this room. I've been doing funerals for over 30 years, and I've lost count of how many I've done. And one of the benefits of going to so many funerals is I get to hear what people say about their loved ones after they've passed. And over the years, I've come to learn that there is one topic that people talk about more than any other during funerals, or when they talk about the person who's passed away. One topic more than any other. I'll tell you, it's not talking about their career. It's not talking about their looks or their wealth or the positions of importance that they gained in the world. That is what we oftentimes think is so important: our career, our wealth, our importance, our looks. That's not what people stand around and talk about for the most part. The one topic they talk about more than any other after the person is gone is the loving things they did. The loving things they did. Like a sower going through a field and flinging out seed. So when we go through life, flinging out love in just little ways, ordinary ways, unremarkable ways, as we walk through life, going to work, going to our jobs, going to church, going through our neighborhood and school, as we walk about doing that, that falls on people's lives and really leaves a lasting impact. I typically will hear stories about people who, the person who's passed away sent them a Christmas card one year when they weren't feeling well. How they stopped after work one night and helped change a flat tire. How they greeted a new employee at work who was on their first day and made them feel more at ease there. Not things that were earth-shaking or remarkable, but little things where love was sown into their life that left a memory that they will not forget. God tells us that the most loving thing is the most important thing. That our lives are meant to be spent sowing love as we go through. And I put that up here on the screen. That is what God calls us to do as we go through life. To just sow love. That is the greatest and most important thing that we are called to do, right? The greatest command we have is to love others. God first, others second. And we've been talking about what this love command is. It's not primarily a feeling that we're supposed to have toward people. When God tells us to love, what did we say the definition is? Seeking others' welfare. That's the simple definition of love. Seeking others' welfare. And if you want a good way to remember it, you can remember it by sowing love. That is seeking others' welfare. That's our job in this world. It doesn't matter as much about your career or as about your importance or about your wealth. That comes and goes, and some people have it and some people don't, but we all can love. And that's what God says matters in the end. If you'll give your life to sowing love wherever you go, number one, God says you'll fulfill every other command I need you to do. Love fulfills everything that needs to be done. And number two, you'll have a whole bunch of people having really good stories about you at your funeral. Just go about sowing love. The most important and greatest thing that God has given us to do. Well, we're in the middle of a sermon series on 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. And in 1 Corinthians 13, it shows us what a life of love looks like. God can say, go and love. But what exactly does that mean we do? And by way of review, we've been learning that love has some specific things that it does. And in those verses, we've gone over the do's and the don'ts of love. The first verses there talk about two specific things that love does. Love is patient, and love is kind. That's what love is. That's how love lives. And then, after these two, goes into 7 things that love doesn't do. And we've looked at each of these in detail. Love doesn't give in to jealousy or bragging, arrogance, rudeness, selfishness, quick temper, or unforgiveness. Love does not live this way. Now, we're coming today to the next verses, which is verse 6, and in this verse, God shifts gears. He's been talking about what love does and what love doesn't do. And he could keep going on in this list, keep talking about things that love doesn't do. And instead, he shifts and in this verse starts talking about principles, 2 principles that love does. And that's what we're going to look at this morning, 2 principles that love lives by, specifically found in verse 6. And before we start, I want to urge you again, think deeply about what we're going to talk about today. God says there's nothing greater or more important for you to do in this world than to love others, God first and people second. And so that means that we need to do really well at this. And if the sermon's going to mean anything later on this afternoon or next week, you're going to have to look at more than just the surface of what we go over. It'll make a lasting impact upon you and change your life if you will look deeply into your own life about how much these principles apply to you. So I encourage you again, look deeply as we go over these qualities and ask God to touch you and make you a person who loves better. Because none of us can love the way we perfectly should. All of us need to grow higher and higher and higher in our love until we're loving like Christ. So this morning, 2 principles that love lives by. Let's begin by looking at verse 6 together. Verse 6, 1 Corinthians 13:6 says, "Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness." Your version may say iniquity or evil or wrongdoing. Love does not rejoice in those things, but rejoices in the truth. All right. First off, notice one thing here, that God, as he's talking about love, pictures love as a person. You know, these verses could say, love doesn't do what's wrong. That'd be the same meaning getting across there. But God doesn't say that. He says, love does not rejoice. It's like a person standing in a room named love, okay? And into the room comes sin. And what is love's emotional reaction to sin? No rejoicing. There's an icy coldness that comes over love when sin walks into the room. On the other hand, right behind sin comes the truth. And what does love do? Rejoices. Runs over and hugs the truth. It's an emotional response that love has. And this gives us the 2 principles by which God now shifts gears. He's talked about specifics. He says, you know what? Instead of continuing to go on and on about more specific, let me give you some principles. Principle number 1, love hates what is sinful. That's what it means. Love does not rejoice in iniquity. Love hates what is sinful. That's the first principle here. Does it sound odd to say that love hates? Love hates. Now, you might say, well, it's not right to hate. You shouldn't hate anybody. You shouldn't hate anything. That's bad. God doesn't agree with that. God doesn't agree with that at all. Look at Proverbs 6:16 through 19. There are 6 things that the Lord hates: arrogant eyes, a lying tongue, hands that kill innocent people, a mind devising wicked plans, feet that are quick to do wrong, a dishonest witness spitting out lies, and a person who spreads conflict among relatives. When sin walks into the room, what is God's emotional reaction? Hatred. God hates. God hates arrogance when arrogance walks in the room. When lying walks in the room, God hates it doubly. Lying's up here twice on his what he hates most list. Lying and then lying again. This is telling us that if you and I are going to live a life of love, we have to hate certain things. Living a life of love means hating certain things. Hating sin. It says in Psalm 97:10, hate evil, you who love the Lord. That's a command. Hate evil. That's a command to us. Amos 5:15, hate evil. Romans 12:9, hate what is evil. Proverbs 8:13, the reverent fear and worshipful awe of the Lord's includes what? Hatred of evil. God's telling us here, after listing a whole bunch of specifics, and could keep going, he says, you know what, let me just sum this up. Instead of giving off, a list of 30 specifics, let me wrap it up. Love hates what's sinful. Love hates what's sinful. Sinful things walk in the room, and love just goes, whoa, and feels hatred toward that thing. And that gives us the opposite principle, too, which is the other half of the verse, and that is that love cherishes what is right. Love cherishes, rejoices over what is right. Look again at verse 6, second half. Love rejoices with the truth, it says. You think it says love does not rejoice in sin, but love rejoices in, and you'd think the opposite of sin is what? What's right, what's good. God doesn't say that here. He says, doesn't rejoice in sin, but does rejoice in the truth. The truth. Why does God say the truth? What does God mean by the truth? When God is speaking about the truth here, he's not meaning any truth, like how high Mount Everest is or how close the closest star is. That's not any truth, but it says the truth. And it means the truth about how to live. The truth about living the right way. Jesus talks about this in John 8. He says, if you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of my mind. And what? And you will know the truth. And the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. Jesus says continuing in his word, and what he says, gives you knowledge of the truth, the true way to live. And that brings freedom. The truth here is talking about the true way to live that brings freedom and life and abundance to your living. That is what God says we will know. And in 1 Corinthians 13, it's talked about the positive things that are the true way to live. It starts with patience. That's the true way to live. The way that brings freedom is by living in patience, not quick to anger, patience. And then kindness, not turning your back and ignoring people in need, but being kind. That is the true way to live. And we could add to that many other lists that are given in the Bible. In the fruit of the Spirit, we could add to this. The true ways to live that bring freedom and life, joy and peace and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The second principle is love cherishes what is right. And the reason is because it's the true way to live. God cherishes what is right because it's the true way to live that brings freedom. See, God intended all the world, every single person, to live a certain way, this way. It's the true way to life. God loves us. He set Adam and Eve in the garden and gave them all sorts of trees for the fruit to take care of them. God has set up this world to take care of us and to live correctly. This is it. But by and large, how many people are living this way? We've all done the opposite. It says we have all gone our own way. Like sheep, we have all gone astray. And we've gone off after the wrong way, the false way to live. And that is the second half here. God doesn't do these things. Love hates what is sinful. Why? Because it is the false way to live. It is the false way to live. The truth brings freedom. And the false way to live, what does that bring? This means sin walks into the room, and love looks over and goes icy cold and hates it because it knows it's the false way to live, the wrong way to live. Don't miss this. Our culture is increasingly saying that there is no false way to live. Our culture is increasingly saying there's no false way to live. Everybody's got their own opinion. Everybody has their own beliefs. Nobody's wrong. We're all right. Whatever you think is right is good for you. Whatever I think is right is good for me. And we don't have the right to say anybody's wrong or false. It's all good. That message is increasingly growing in our society today. Once again, God couldn't disagree more. God says there are absolutely false ways to live. He says, I've listed here in 1 Corinthians 13, the false ways to live. Jealousy, bragging, arrogance, rudeness, selfishness, quick temper, and unforgiveness. Those aren't true ways to live. Those are false ways to live. Proverbs 6 was the 6 things God hates. Those are all false. Arrogance, lying, murder, scheming, lying, creating conflict. Those are all false ways to live. We could add to that Galatians 5, the lusts of the flesh, sex sins, perversion, lusting, idolatry, sorcery, hatred and quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, rage, selfishness, conflict, division, envy, drunkenness, and wild partying. False ways to live. And we could add to that a list in Colossians 3. Pride, arrogance, envy, lust, greed, evil desire, dirty language, cursing. These are all false ways to live that God says we must avoid. Why? Why must we avoid these things? Lots of people don't avoid many of these things. Why does God say we need to avoid these things? Because they all promise to lead to freedom, but they actually lead to destruction. All these ways promise to lead to freedom, but they all lead to destruction. Did you ever see a video of those cranes with the big balls on the end that go up to old buildings and then they just crash into them until the whole building's destroyed? That's what God says sin is. Sin is a wrecking ball that crushes and destroys our lives. Now you say, well, Pastor, if that were true, no one would do any of these things, right? Because if they was that harmful, why would anyone take, any of those things and do them? Well, it's the same reason a fish bites down on a lure, right? It looks good. Many of these things look really good and inviting and promising. This will work out well. This is what other people are doing, and they seem fulfilled. And so we bite down on it. In that first bite, it might say, wow, I made a good choice here. This is really pleasurable. This is really satisfying. This is the way to go. And then what happens? Then we get yanked. And that hook sinks into us. It doesn't make our life better. It doesn't work good in our lives. It works destruction in our lives. God says there's a false way to live, and it's a way that gives destruction. Promises life, but it gives destruction. And remember, never forget Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived. In other words, you can be very deceived about this. Do not be deceived. Whatever you plant is what you will harvest. For the one who plants his sinful desires will flow from his flesh, harvest the wrecking ball of destruction. But the one who plants to the Spirit will, from the Spirit, harvest eternal, what? Life. Why does love turn icy when sin walks into the room? Because what is love's goal? What is love's aim? What is love's target? Other people's welfare. What does sin take away? Other people's welfare. That's why sin hates love and love hates sin. They're totally opposite. When love sees sin, it bristles with hatred because it loves people. And God shouts to us, do not be deceived. Sin is a wrecking ball that destroys lives. Don't go there. So God is saying in all this how to live a life of love. He says if you're going to live a life of love, you have to hate certain things and love certain things. Number one, you have to hate sin because you have the belief in your head that sin destroys. Every time it destroys. And then you also have to have a feeling of cherishing what is right because you believe that doing the right thing is what brings life. The bad sin brings destruction. Right brings life. That's why love has the emotional reactions it does. Now let's apply these principles that we've seen this morning to our lives. I hadn't originally planned just to spend probably about 5 minutes on verse 6 and just move on to the other verses. And then as I got going deeper and deeper, I realized, my goodness, this is a very profound set of verses, set of principles that we really need to apply to our lives. I want you, first of all, to think about a sin that you're prone to saying yes to, prone to giving into, a sin that you're weak about. Can you think of a sin like that? Now, let me ask you, why do you think you give into it so often? I doubt it's lack of knowledge, right? You know it's sin. You know it's something God doesn't want you to do and that doesn't make your life better in the long run. So I doubt it's not because of lack of knowledge that you're not resisting it. I have found in my years of being a pastor that there are two major reasons why people don't say no to sin. And number one is they don't know how to fight it off. One reason is they don't know how to really not do it. They just find themselves doing it before they think about it, and there it goes, and now they hate themselves. So they're not fighting well. They don't know how to do it well. And that's the topic for another sermon for another time. But the more common reason that most people don't deny a sin, the most common reason that I have run across is, number two, they just really don't intend to. They just don't intend to conquer the sin. They'll say, yeah, I know I shouldn't lust, but, who's it really hurting? It's not that big a deal. No, I shouldn't curse and swear. No, I shouldn't gossip. I know these things aren't right, but, everybody does, and it isn't that big of a deal. And so they don't really give themselves to intend to get it out of their lives. But what does God call that type of thinking? God says, you're deceived. You're deceived as you think you can plant sin and not harvest destruction. Even little things, even common things. God says you're deceived and you need to wake up because the harvest is going to come in if you continue to live that way. Listen, to live a life of love, listen, this is an important part of this sermon. To live a life of love, you must have hatred for sin. And that comes from the belief that sin destroys. Okay? You must have hatred for sin to live a life of love. That's what God is saying in these verses. Let's look at these false ways that God says to live. Now, we would probably look at most of those sins and you would say, yeah, those are awful. I don't love any of those. They're despicable and I hate most of those sins. But our world, our culture works very, very strongly at getting us to like some of these things, to say that they're not that bad. Actually, you can get ahead with some of these things. Our culture is very strong on that, and that's called the ways of the world, listening to the world, becoming worldly, is where you don't think that every single one of these is 100% bad 100% of the time. So let's go through a couple of these and see how you are doing. First of all, dirty language and cursing. That's a very common thing in our society. It's hard to turn on the television today without, after 5 minutes, hearing some cursing or dirty language. Go to a movie, or pick up a magazine. Good grief, listen to some of our political leaders talk. You'll hear cursing and dirty language, and it's easy at that point. You'll say, well, look, everybody does this. It's just a way of making an emphasis. It's a way of showing strength and kind of underlining and putting an exclamation point behind things. I don't really mean anything bad, but what does God say? God says if you're going to live a life of love, you have to hate dirty language and cursing. You have to hate it. Because why? Because you understand that it destroys. You may not feel it or see it or perceive that it's destructive. God says it is. You can't plant seeds of sin and not harvest destruction. And that goes with dirty language and cursing. Is that something you need to hate, to really hate? Not just think, well, it shouldn't be done, but really hate in your life? God says hate it. That's what a life of love does. How about this? Lying, listed twice as among the top 6 things God hates most. It gets 2 out of 6. God hates lying. Do we see lying going on? All the time. I looked up, they've done studies on how often people lie. People will admit, 60% of people admit that they, during a 10-minute conversation, will often lie twice on average. They'll make something up. They'll exaggerate something that, it's not true, but I want to make myself look better. Or I want to get out of trouble. Or I want to get an advantage. 60% of people say in a 10 minutes time, they will often lie 2 times. 10 minutes, 2 times. I don't know what your statistics are, But God says it's supposed to be 0 times. Why? Because living a life of love means you hate lying. You hate it. It's a planting a seed that harvests destruction. We don't want it in our lives, and we don't want it in other people's lives. Lying walks in, and we should bristle with icy hatred about lying. Does that reflect your attitude, your emotional reaction to lying? It's far too easy to lie. Kids learn it real early. Man, I can just lie, and I just got out of trouble. I just got something I wanted. And all I had to do was lie. And we grow up as an adult, and we can do the same thing. God says, I hate that. And we must hate it too, because it destroys. Is that something you need to make sure you fully hate in your life? To live a life of love, you have to hate lying. Here's the third one. Sex sins, lust. No need to tell you how common this is in our world. Our world says that, look, watching a sex scene on TV doesn't hurt anybody. That's not a big deal. Watching pornography is a victimless crime. Listening to sexually charged songs, reading sexually charged novels or magazines, this isn't bad. What 2 consenting adults do in private isn't bad. It isn't wrong. It's no big deal. Happens all the time. And hearing that and hearing those lies, hearing that point of view from our culture continue to make us lower the walls on lust and say, well, yeah, I know technically I shouldn't do this, but, it's not that bad. Romans 1:32 talks about the attitude of our culture. It says, though they are fully aware of God's righteous decree, that those who do such things, that's the list that we had up there, that those who do such things deserve to die. They not only do them themselves, but approve and applaud others who do them. Our culture holds parades for people who commit sex sins, pride parades for people who commit sex sins. Our culture puts on our television the most romantic, wonderfully beautiful scenes of unmarried people committing sin. And lifts it up and gives Oscars and awards to these programs where the core theme of the show is adultery. Our culture applauds and praises the sex sins that God says, destroy. Proverbs talks about the sin of adultery. It says, can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? Try that. Take a hot coal today and put it in your shirt and see what happens to you. God says you cannot do that and not be harmed. God says you cannot lust and think that you won't get harmed. You will. You cannot commit adultery or sleep with someone you're not married to and get anything but harm out of it. That's why love bristles and hates sexual sins so much. Sex outside of marriage destroys, and while it might be very pleasurable and very exciting, and everybody who's in the media and celebrities are all doing this and their lives seem so wonderful, God says you can't plant those seeds and harvest anything else but destruction. Number one, you will hurt Christ. You will despise him. You're standing up to Jesus Christ who died on the cross for you, who is your king, and you're saying, I'm not obeying your command here. I'm just not going to do it. You're showing great disrespect for Christ when you do that. Number two, you grieve the Holy Spirit. Number three, you cause your relationship with the God the Father to put a wall up between you where he will not answer your prayers. If I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. Number four, you wage war against your very soul through these things which are destroying you. And number five, you open yourself to satanic attacks. You're no longer wearing the breastplate of righteousness, which protects you from his flaming arrows to take you down. You will go down, and God will allow you to go down until you realize this is sin and I need to stop what I'm doing. This is ruining my life. It may be very pleasurable, but this is ruining and destroying my life. This is what God says. While our culture encourages and celebrates sex sins, love doesn't. Love hates it. Love can't do that. Like God, we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. We can never encourage people to go in that way. We can never fly a rainbow flag in front of our church and say, it doesn't matter what sins you're involved in, we accept you. You don't have to change anything. There's so many churches doing that. God says, you're encouraging and you're applauding sins that are destructive and destroying people's lives. This is why God is so intent that we as Christians care for each other and watch each other so that we don't fall into sin. Galatians 6:1, brethren, if anyone is caught in a sin, and that means that's a trap. Picture a person with their leg caught in a bear trap. If anyone's caught in a sin, you are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. What is the loving thing to do if you see a person with their foot in a bear trap? Well, I'll just pray for him. I don't want to get involved in their business. That isn't something that's really, for me to say is right or wrong. I'm just going to, back up and mind my own business. No. Right? And if you see a fellow Christian caught in a sin, God says the loving thing to do is what? Seek their welfare. To help them out of that trap. Just like you need help when you get tangled up in a sin through stupidity or ignorance or rebellion. You need someone to come along, put their arm around you and say, hey, this isn't the way to go. Let's head God's way. There are times to overlook our faults and failures. Absolutely. To be tolerating, to just bite your tongue and be patient. We all need that from each other because we've all got flaws. But there are other times when we are committing clear sin and we don't show signs of stopping, that we need someone to come alongside us and say, hey, let's go God's way. Let's turn from this and get back on track. Why? Because this is destroying you. Sin destroys, and you're not turning away from it. Let's get back on track. And by the way, notice the way you're supposed to do it. With a spirit of gentleness. Never with a crushing, I'm better than you, I'm your judge, I'm saying you're wrong, let me set your life straight. No, coming alongside as a brother or sister and gently saying, hey, look at what you're doing. This is hurting you. Let's get back on the path of righteousness. It can be a very scary thing to do something like that. But what is love? Love is seeking others' welfare regardless of the cost. And so we swallow hard and think, well, yeah, but that person could reject me. That person could get angry with me and tell me to mind my own business. But regardless of the cost, we are to seek others' welfare. God says there's a right way to rescue someone, a Christian who's caught in a sin. And that is go speak to them lovingly and gently about it. And the Holy Spirit can take that and help them and get them out. As a pastor, I've talked to many, many people. Just took one comment, boom, get right back on the path. And there might be someone in your life who's on the wrong path, with the wrong attitude, with the wrong approach. It's more than just a fault to, overlook. It's something they really need to get right with this. Love doesn't look on and say, well, I should mind my own business. Love says, just like that person caught in a bear trap, I need to move in and help them. Gently. Remember, love is never rude. Love is gentle and kind. That's what God says we must do for each other, because love seeks others' welfare. Well, in conclusion, what is the great goal of your life? You ever thought about that? What is the great goal of your life? The one top thing that you're going to need to accomplish. God says, I've given you the one great, most important command, and that is love. As we said, our job is to sow love wherever we go, seeking others' welfare as you go through life. So as you get up tomorrow morning and you walk to the breakfast table, seek others' welfare. Sow seeds of love. As you go off to school or work, sowing love. As you go through your community, as you come home at night, as you come here on Sunday, just sowing love. Little acts of love, seeking others' welfare. That's what God says is the greatest, most important thing you and I can do and spend our lives doing. Sowing love, then, as we've seen here, has two principles. Two principles. Number one, love hates what is sinful because it destroys. And number two, love cherishes what is right because it's the right way to live. It leads to freedom and abundance. Here's your homework. I want you to spend some time this week, time today, thinking about that sin that you're prone to, that sin that you tend to give into. Number two, ask yourself, do you really hate that sin? Do you really hate that sin? Because it might be that you 75% hate it, but not 100% hate it. That you don't hate it enough. If you aren't really hating that sin enough, number one, ask God to give you a deep hatred for it. He hates it because it hurts your life, and he hates whatever hurts your life. Ask God to give you a deep hatred for it. Number two, spend some time thinking about what its effect on your life. Spend some time thinking about that. As I said, it disrespects Jesus by just dismissing his command to you. I'm not going to obey you. It disrespects Jesus. It grieves the Holy Spirit. It separates you from close fellowship with God the Father so that he's not going to hear your prayers. It wages war against your soul. And it leaves you exposed to Satan's attacks because you're no longer wearing the breastplate of righteousness. Satan wants everybody thinking that sin is no big deal. You can do it, yeah. Our culture wants us applauding and celebrating certain sins. Love says every time it hates sin, hates it, because it destroys. Make sure that describes you. Living a life of love means you have a deep hatred for sin because of its destruction. Sowing love is the greatest and most important thing we can do with our lives, and we never stop getting better at it. It's always something that we can increase and get higher and higher and higher in our ability to do it in life. So wherever you are and you're loving others, increase it. Keep going higher. It's the greatest and most important thing that we can do with our lives.